The sudden postponement of US President Donald Trump's visit to China is not merely a change in the diplomatic schedule. Behind this decision, many analyses suggest it is a sign of a deeper strategic calculation directly linked to the escalating tensions in Iran. In the context of the intensifying Middle East conflict, Washington has been forced to reallocate priorities, shifting focus away from the negotiating table with Beijing to handle a variable deemed more urgent. From the perspective of observers, delaying the trip reflects a tactical choice. The US needs to stabilize the Iranian front before entering major negotiations with China. Iran is not only a military hotspot, but also a vital link in the global energy supply chain, particularly regarding the Strait of Hormuz, a shipping route that directly affects Beijing's interests. Without control over this region, it is difficult for the US to create sufficiently strong leverage at the bargaining table. However, reality shows that the situation in Iran is evolving more conjugately than expected, causing original plans to be prolonged. This has forced Mr. Trump to temporarily step back on the diplomatic front. From this viewpoint, the story is no longer about to postpone or not to postpone, but rather that the US is not yet ready to enter the big game with China, while a key strategic link remains unresolved. Specific developments show that Donald Trump's visit to China was originally set for late March, with expectations of becoming a restart for high-level relations and negotiations with Xi Jinping. However, the decision to postpone by about 5 to 6 weeks was explained by the US side as a move to focus on handling tensions in Iran, a rapidly escalating hotspot. Formally speaking, this reason is entirely plausible, given that the US must face military risks and political pressure in the Middle East. The direct impact of this decision is significant. First, the progress of US-China negotiations on key issues such as tariffs, technology, and supply chains has stalled. Meanwhile, global markets immediately reacted with a sense of instability. Energy prices fluctuated sharply, strategic transport routes were threatened, and investor confidence was shaken. A high-level diplomatic visit, originally expected to signal stability, has now become a manifestation of delay and uncertainty. However, at this point, many observers argue that the public explanation has not yet touched the essence of the matter. The last-minute postponement of a long-prepared visit usually stems not just from being busy with warfare, but reflects a shift in strategic calculation. In other words, Iran is not just the reason, but potentially the central variable forcing Washington to adjust its entire tempo. At a deeper level, Iran's role goes far beyond being a regional hotspot. This nation sits in a key position controlling the Strait of Hormuz, a transit point for a significant portion of the global oil supply. Any disruption here immediately impacts energy prices and international supply chains. For China, this is even more sensitive because its economy depends heavily on oil imports passing through this route. Therefore, in the strategic logic of the US, stabilizing or at least controlling the situation in Iran serves not only military goals but also carries distinct economic and geopolitical significance. When global energy flows are under pressure, import-dependent countries like China will be directly affected. This means the US can indirectly create leverage in bilateral negotiations. This argument can be summarized in a familiar principle of modern geopolitics. Whoever controls energy controls the negotiating table. In the context of US-China competition expanding from trade to technology and security, energy becomes an indispensable card. From this perspective, delaying the visit is not an interruption, but a step back in rhythm to prepare for a more favorable board state. However, the problem lies in the fact that reality did not follow the intended script. Iran did not collapse quickly as many strategists expected. Instead, the country showed strong resistance, expanding its scope of impact and making the situation more unpredictable. Military activities have not only dragged on, but also forced the US to disperse both military and political resources. As a consequence, Washington has fallen into a state of strategic overstretch. On one hand, they need to maintain a presence and control the situation in the Middle East. On the other hand, they still have to prepare for long-term confrontations with China. This dispersion has forced diplomatic plans, originally designed with high precision, to be adjusted. Thus, the Beijing visit is no longer appropriate in terms of timing, as the necessary conditions to create an advantage have not yet been secured. From this viewpoint, Mr. Trump's decision to postpone the trip is not a sign of mere delay, but an expression of a more complex reality. US global strategy is being dominated by variables that are difficult to control. Iran, in this case, has become the factor that derailed the plan, forcing Washington to prioritize handling it before it can return to the big chessboard with China. While Washington is forced to shift strategy because of Iran, the reaction from Beijing shows a completely different state: calm, restrained, and somewhat proactive in its silence. Following Mr. Trump's decision to postpone the visit, the Chinese side did not issue any harsh reactions, nor did they take the opportunity to exert media or diplomatic pressure. Instead, they maintained a familiar message: both sides remain in contact, high-level diplomacy is still important, and there are no signs of a breakdown. This behavior is not accidental. It reflects a calculated choice to avoid being caught up in the rhythm created by the US while keeping flexible space for themselves. In the context of Iran becoming a hotspot, China's lack of direct, deep involvement helps them avoid the risk of being dragged into a military crisis, something that goes against Beijing's priority of stable development. At a deeper level, China seems to be utilizing the complexity of the situation to keep the pace and wait for the right time. When the US must disperse resources to the Middle East, direct pressure on China in fields like trade, technology, or the military temporarily eases. This creates a strategic vacuum that Beijing can exploit, consolidating internal strength, maintaining economic stability, and observing how Washington handles the hotspots. The concept of strategic defense, in this case, becomes particularly relevant. China does not need to react strongly, nor does it need to rush to the negotiating table when conditions are not yet truly favorable. Keeping diplomatic channels open with Xi Jinping while not escalating tensions allows Beijing to maintain a flexible position, ready for dialogue but not forced into a position of having to make concessions. The contrast between the two approaches, one where the US is forced to handle a crisis and another where China patiently observes, is creating a notable mismatch on the geopolitical chessboard. And it is this mismatch that makes the timing for a high-level meeting not yet ripe. In the broader picture, another notable factor is the role of Ukraine, a minor link that is increasingly showing its position within the US-led strategic system. Recent moves by Volodymyr Zelensky show that Kyiv is not only focused on the war with Russia, but is also ready to expand its presence to other hotspots, including the Middle East. The participation of Ukrainian citizens in supporting the US and Israel in dealing with Iranian UAVs in terms of scale may not change the battlefield situation. However, in terms of the political message, this is a remarkable step. It clearly demonstrates Ukraine's effort to bind itself more closely to Washington's strategic priorities. The motivation behind this action is relatively clear. Ukraine currently remains heavily dependent on military and financial aid from the US, in a context where Washington must share resources across multiple regions. The risk of being deprioritized is very real. Therefore, Kyiv's proactive companionship with the US on other fronts can be seen as a way to consolidate its position in the eyes of its ally. In other words, Ukraine is not only fighting on the Eastern European battlefield, but also has to fight on the political front to maintain attention and support commitments from the US. This is a form of soft competition that is no less fierce, competing not to be forgotten in a world where hotspots increasingly overlap. Ukraine's emergence in the Middle East context also reflects a broader trend. Today's conflicts are no longer isolated, but are increasingly linked in a network of overlapping interests and strategies. This causes every decision, whether military or diplomatic, to have a ripple effect beyond its original scope. From all the above factors, it can be seen that Mr. Trump's postponement of the China visit is not simply a schedule adjustment. It is the result of a chain of interconnected impacts. The Iranian battlefield has not been controlled as expected, strategic calculations have not met the necessary conditions, and partners are also self-adjusting their positions in a volatile context. And in that state, the visit to Beijing becomes a card that cannot yet be played. It is not cancelled, but it cannot be deployed at the right time. The story, therefore, does not stop at when the visit will take place, but lies in the bigger question: when the strategic conditions will be ripe enough for a real negotiation to begin. Until then, the situation will continue to move toward exploration, restraint, and waiting. Because, as many analyses have pointed out, as long as Iran has not cooled down, the US-China chessboard cannot truly begin.